everybody. I'm Natalie Natalie Tillett, recently divorced. And I'm here to host the panel about the future of artificial intelligence and what's next for business. I've been working in this space for 5-6 years now, trying to deepen and diversify the digital tech and data science pipeline with digital skills training, developing products, and working with government and industry to address the issue around underrepresentation in terms of who is deploying and developing this technology. Just to give you a couple of stats, because I like stats, the data science pipeline and talent pool has about 25% women, about 12% ethnic minorities, and if you want to go down, from there, 4% black and 1% black women. So if we look at the technologies that's shaping our lives, there's a bigger conversation in terms of who is influencing this technology. I have a fantastic panel. We're talking about the current, gosh, I've gone really loud. Turn me down a bit. The current situation, what are the realities? What's for the future? What's the macro landscape? And also, if we just talk about, I don't know what anybody's knowledge around this is, but in May of this year, number 10 acknowledged the existential risk of AI. And this is not just an existential risk, but it's also an exponential opportunity for us. So we want to kind of try and talk people down from the ledge there, but also be realistic about the risks and the opportunities around this. Can I just get my panel to introduce themselves, starting with Gareth?
Yeah, morning everybody. Gareth Oldale, so I'm a partner at TLT, and I head up the data privacy and cybersecurity team.
So my name is Martin Keelagher. I'm the CEO of Agile Automations. We are an intelligent automations provider based in Manchester, automating everyday business processes for organisations.
Tom Cheesewright. I'm an applied futurist, which is a real job, it turns out. I work with mostly big companies on what the future looks like, how they tell stories about that future, and what on earth they do about it. And I'm getting asked about AI all the time at the moment.
Yeah.
Great. It's Amin, Tabassi. I'm head of MSc Project Management Program at Manchester Metropolitan University, and currently we are working on AI for the future of project management discipline.
Great, thank you very much. So can we start with the macro landscape, actually, Gareth? I want to come to you. We had this conversation this morning, but I sort of feel like it's a little bit of a race. If you think about school sports day, and the UK is blue team, where are we in relation to the rest of the EU and the world in terms of regulation, maturity, that sort of thing?
It's actually my son's school sports day today. I didn't tell you this earlier.
You're missing it.
I know, to be here, you better win. So in terms of the global race, we've seen so much happen in such a short space of time in the last 6 months or so. I think there's lots in the room here who'll be aware that AI as a thing has been around for years. There's lots of we had a video on Peak up here just a few minutes ago, and there's lots of fantastic AI companies that have been operating for a long time. But I think what's accelerated it, obviously, in the last 6 months is the developments in generative AI, ChatGPT, and other applications like that. And so you've seen a real surge in countries around the world looking at how they regulate AI, and it has become a bit of a race, and possibly people running certainly in their own lanes and possibly in slightly different directions at times. So, for example, the UK trying to take quite a more of a less interventionist approach, I guess, than is happening in the EU, for example, where we've got the EU AI Act that's working its way through the EU institutions. The UK currently not looking to implement any kind of statutory framework for governing AI, but rather relying on guidance to enforce. No new liabilities or penalties to be implemented under the UK's AI white paper compared to the EU, where there is going to be new liabilities introduced. Again, different approaches as to how AI is regulated in the EU, setting up more of a centralised function for regulating use of AI. The UK will rely on the existing regulators to regulate the use of AI in the sectors that they already look after. So even just across the English Channel, we're seeing that kind of divergence emerge. You look more broadly, you see what's happening in Japan, in America, where you had ChatGPT in front of US Congress saying, please regulate us, our industry needs regulation. And then, just a couple of weeks ago, Rishi Sunak flying into the US for his big announcements with Joe Biden, one of which was this agreement for the UK to host an international AI-focused plenary session, I guess, to try and work out how we regulate AI across the globe moving forward. So hard to say at the moment who's winning the race. It's pretty even seems. We're just still getting out the blocks, people getting up into their stride, but the UK is certainly in the vanguard of looking to seize the opportunities that AI provides.
Okay, and if we were looking at, so you just explained that there are a number of different regulatory frameworks across all of these jurisdictions. For anybody who's developing AI and has global ambitions around this, it's a nightmare, to be fair, because you know, if you're a bank and you've got, you know, across that footprint.
Exactly right. You need to, if you're operating internationally, especially, you need to know that what you're developing can comply with each of the regimes across the globe. And so then, when you start to see divergence, you know, if there's one approach which is slightly less interventionist or a bit more lax, you're still going to have to build your solution to meet the bar of the other markets that you're trying to sell. It's a truly global service, isn't it? And a truly global client base as well. So some harmonisation across the globe is going to be really important. And I think that's why the UK is looking to try and lead the conversation to set the agenda for what a minimum standard looks like.
Yeah, that sounds complex, and I'm sure you can help them with that.
Absolutely.
Martin, you know, from your perspective, what are you seeing in terms of organisations, you know, at the organisational level, and then, you know, how are they applying this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's like Tom says, I think it's on the list of every board meeting now is AI. You know, how can we implement AI within the business? We don't want to get left behind. And what does it actually mean as a business? A lot of people think or want AI within their organisation, but don't necessarily know where to start, how to implement it, how it can be used, what it actually does for their businesses, whether it can be a benefit or whether it can be disruptive internally to the organisation. So it's a huge subject, as we've kind of touched upon, not even just from legislation, but even having the compute power. So you mentioned about where the UK stands in the kind of global aspect of it. Unfortunately, the reality is we're kind of miles behind. We're probably not in the race just yet. Never mind getting a top 3 spot. You know, we've spoken about putting £1 billion into the infrastructure up in Scotland to build a supercomputer. But the reality is, if you take an Amazon, you know, they're investing $30 billion per annum on something like this. So, you know, we're kind of throwing an acorn at a supertanker. So there's a huge kind of opportunity there for us and organisations, but we still need to have the infrastructure to support that. Green tech, the actual, you know, we need to have just having the power to actually power the kind of data centres that we're talking about to make sure that we're not blowing our kind of carbon statuses. Even that is just miles behind the curve. So we have got some work to do. It probably was a quick summary of that, you know, but there is a huge opportunity there. I think businesses have got to embrace certainly the capabilities of AI. I think it's a case of being sensible with it. So when we work with our organisations, we try and break it down into the individual elements where we know it can add value. So not necessarily putting it everywhere, because obviously some people get extremely giddy with it and think it's going to be the, you know, the saviour of the world in terms of their organisation. And sometimes you have to kind of break it down into the key elements of what it can offer. And that can be just as simple as a supercharged chatbot, for instance. So, you know, rather it being kind of governed by internal documentation, which of course it learns from, you're able to open up to a much larger data set, assuming of course data quality and everything, which is probably another completely different subject. But I think, you know, organisations ultimately, you know, they've got to look at how they can embrace it, how they can embrace it effectively, and also how they can reward as well. So another big thing that we've kind of been talking to our clients about is how the AI learns, so how it actually learns internally with the organisation, which is also, I find that really interesting, because historically, obviously, predominantly you have people that come into the organisation, don't necessarily have the experience, and then they build that up. As they build, their experience grows and they get remunerated for that within the organisation. because they have a much wider knowledge set, etc., etc. The reality is that AI is a much more leveler for that. So you can bring someone in with 6 months experience, the AI tool, hopefully if they've geared it up right, is learning from the individual that's been in the company for 30 years. That person that's been in 6 months then has access to that knowledge base. So you've got that whole level then across the board, which then opens up a whole interesting conversation with HR in terms of how you reward your workforce. So, you know, how do you make sure that you're rewarding those individuals with that experience who are actually training up the AI to then supercharge, you know, some of those people that haven't necessarily got the experience but can leapfrog that because they've got the AI tools. So there's all these kind of challenges, but, you know, there's huge opportunities as well. And I think it's really just, for us, it's working with the organisation and making sure that whatever you put in is the right solution and it's not disruptive to the organisation.
Yeah. And what's the reality around data and skills for these organisations? Because those are two limiters as well. So having the actual data to train the models, and then having the skills, because we've got a number of open roles around this, haven't we?
Data sets obviously huge in AI, and having the ability to learn off those data sets. We have global clients with 75,000 plus staff, and they do not have the data sets for AI. You know, they think they do. They go, oh, we want AI everywhere, and it will do all these wonderful things for us. And you go, well, how many clients have you got? And they go, we've got 100,000 clients. Data set. It's not enough. It's just not enough for it to learn effectively, to be implemented and actually add value. And I think that's quite a shock for clients, you know, because they think we're these huge companies. You know, we've got global offices, and the reality is that they just don't have the data sets to make it effective. So that then brings on, as we were kind of talking about, you know, the kind of that whole cross-border data sharing, its GDPR aspects, you know, taking the UK and the challenges for the UK, you know, how does it create an environment where the infrastructure might be based in the US, but you've got a regulated party that's trading in London that can't share data with the US? It might be FATCA regulations or other things that's involved within that. So there's this huge kind of multitude of things, and it always comes back to, you know, garbage in, garbage out. So a lot of businesses, you know, their data sets, the reality is that they are just not, even through the GDPR Act and other things, their data sets aren't up to scratch yet. So the first thing, if you're ever looking at the AI and implementation, is to go through your data sets, streamline them, make sure they're up to date, that they're high quality, that they're relevant, accurate, etc., etc. All of those things, because if you start with a rubbish data to start with, you've no chance, absolutely no chance. And we've seen that through, you know, through AI. We've all seen the kind of, you know, racist comments, all kinds of things that it kind of learns, because all it's going off is data sets. It doesn't know if it's right or wrong data. The AI just uses it. So that's why it's very important to make sure your data is accurate and up to date, etc., to start with.
Absolutely. I'm going to come to you, Tom, but Amin, can you give us an overview of, because you work quite heavily in the project management space, and if we look at that as a discipline, you know, a traditional discipline in business, how is AI affecting those types of roles and, you know, the outputs of those?
Right, thank you very much. Before I talk about the AI, I would like to give you some overview of the current situation that we have in different projects. Based on the latest publications by Standish Group, every year we spend approximately $48 trillion on projects, and only 35% of the project completed successfully. And if we just imagine what happened to that 65%, that 35% already completed successfully, and 65% have some issues or problems with resources, with the financial and the time, we will identify that the huge issues we have with current economics because of unsuccessful projects. Therefore, using AI techniques, tools, and techniques as a complement profession for project managers is an initiative. Why? Because we have lots of challenges with current projects that we have in the different businesses. When we look at AI, we look at it on two angles, in the current and the future one. For the current, for the next 2 decades, we believe that AI creates lots of job opportunities and help project managers in many ways, especially on the admin jobs that currently project managers dealing with. And for the future, we think that the project managers, or those who are dealing with managing the projects, require to emphasize more on quality skills rather than quantity skills, because AI at the current stage that we are in, it's very good to help us on quantity-based analysis and predictions for the future. But the dark side of AI will be the next 20 years, because we know that for the next 2 decades, we are generating lots of jobs relevant to AI and also helping project managers. But what will be happen after 20 years? It's a dark side of that one that require more research and strategies for that particular section. The current adaptations of AI in project management at the moment is a weak AI adaptation. I call it as a basic adaptation of AI. But in future, we would like to be more on deep AI practices. Currently, the AI help project managers on the admin task mostly at the planning stage. Less contribution at the operation or execution stage we can see from the AI. It's good for the traditional method of doing project, as you mentioned, and for the future we would like to shift the AI to more agile practices, especially when you want to make a real-time decision making. You need to have proper information in order to support your decisions. Lots of advantages we can extract from AI. Again, the recent research that's done by PMI, and they focus on companies that invested on AI for managing their projects. They identify approximately 15% efficiency back to the companies when they are adopting any form of AI in their projects. But it's still SMEs and lots of companies dealing with the huge cost or the short-term investment that they need to put for AI technology to bring to their companies, and a long run of return on investments that they probably back to the companies is a major challenge for many practitioners in the world of project management. We think that AI techniques and tools as a complement project management roles will help them on risk management. At the current stage, we know that lots of issues that we have with our projects associated with some form of risk predictions, and we believe that AI can help a lot project managers in order to have better predictions about the future.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So I want to talk about the 20 years that you just talked about, the dark side of AI. Tom, this is your bag right here. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, when I start talking to people about AI, I have to spend the first 10 minutes explaining that we're not talking about Skynet and Terminator, and that the existential risk that people are so scared about probably isn't some sentient computer taking over our nuclear weapons and blowing up the planet. Like, that's not on the horizon. And if it is, it's because somebody was spectacularly stupid and decided to try and optimize our nuclear response by sticking an untrained AI in there. I don't think even some of our most stupid leaders are quite that stupid.
Can I just
or at least there are enough checks and balances in place to stop them doing it. Once you've done that, the question gets into 2 things. It becomes, where do I apply it in my organization, and what impact does that have? Yeah. And so really the big threat that we probably ought to be regulating for now, the question that a lot of people have is it going to eat my job? Yeah. And, AI doesn't take jobs. There's a very important, it sounds like a semantic distinction, but AIs don't take jobs, they take work. Everybody's job, everybody in this room is a human being with a complex set of skills, an array of skills, and your job involves lots of different things. You've got to talk to somebody, you've got to listen, you've got to take instructions, you've got to create new stuff, you've got to communicate those things to other people. An AI cannot do that range of things. It doesn't matter whether you are emptying bins, landscape gardening, a lawyer or an accountant, and one AI cannot do all those things. But it can do segments of work.
Yes.
And that work really falls into 2 categories. It's pattern recognition, the sorts of things like Peak AI does. Can I find errors in this contract? Can I find patterns in this set of accounting data? and throw up interesting examples and give me better analytics. And it's pattern replication, sorts of things that Martin does. Take this task that has a repeatable set of inputs and outputs, a data set that I can use to train it and produce something and take some load off people, or do things better actually. And increasingly the last 2 years, that replication can actually be generating things that are, I wouldn't say original, but at least look new by remixing lots of existing data, and that's why that original data set is so important. And that, then that gets into complex conversations. That's where that fear and that dark side comes back. Am I going to, sack, we've got 1 million people employed in call centres in the UK. Are 80% of them going to be gone? I think possibly sooner than that, really 40-year time frame, because we can replace a lot of them with chatbots, maybe. What in the Boston consulting model is the sort of the wings of the rocket ship in your professional services firms, the people who actually make most of the money for you, doing a lot of the paper shuffling grunt work. How many of those could be automated? Or, could we have one person running 4 or 5 AI platforms that are doing a lot of that work? Possibly. Those are challenging conversations. And for me, that's kind of where the regulation has to be focused right now, because that is potentially very disruptive to the economy.
So what about loss over autonomous systems, etc., that type of risk? Do you think, how far away are we from that type of hazard becoming a reality?
So I'll give you one practical example. My brother-in-law is a health and safety inspector.
Yeah.
And he goes and sees all sorts of horrors in factories where appropriate controls have not been put in place or have been bypassed, and there's been an accident and someone's died or been seriously injured. You can foresee a situation with current levels of technology where someone put an AI in place to try to optimize the outputs of a factory, and in doing so, the system decided to bypass or exceed certain tolerances that created risk for people in the environment. And it might be in things that look really innocuous. It ran a motor or a bearing 20% past or even 5% past its sort of rating, and something failed. And that is the sort of risk I think we need to regulate for right now.
Gareth, who's at fault if that happens?
Well, it's a good question. It depends what country you're in and what laws you're trying to enforce. And this is one of the challenges, I think, of the UK approach, if it's AI is causing some kind of data breach, then you've got the GDPR to fall back on, and that will come into play to enforce. If it's something that gives rise to a health and safety risk, then there's regulation around that as well. I guess in your scenario, I'm no health and safety lawyer, but you would think that it's the organisation that's deploying the AI that's going to be culpable for it, rather than the AI developers themselves.
Yeah.
That's generally where the same would be true if it was a data protection breach. It's the person deploying the tech that still has to make the decision and own the decision for, is it appropriate?
Okay. One last kind of tip for everyone in terms of moving the needle for themselves.
Ooh, excellent. I would say the debate at the moment is very polarised. You're either the end of the world is nigh, the robots are going to kill us, or you're so evangelical about it that AI is going to cure the world's problems. And I think probably finding a middle path would be my one tip. Don't believe everything you see in the papers.
Thank you. Okay, great. What about yourself?
Top tips.
Yeah.
I think it's making sure your data sets are there, breaking down within the organisation the opportunities, making sure you're not trying to automate or bring AI into everything. So it's looking at the core areas that you can work on. Goes back to your point around the projects that fail. If you're trying to do 100, chances are 75 are going to fail. So make sure you do 5 that are really good and you get good traction on them. So that's one thing I'd recommend to do.
As much something to watch rather than a tip.
Okay.
Look who's calling for regulation. It's the market leaders. Market leaders always call for regulation because it's a fantastic competitive moat around their business. Yes, we should regulate. Be cautious about how we regulate and listening to the people who are in a very strong position in determining that regulation.
Yes.
Right. My suggestion is, or advice would be, more towards ethics in AI and also trust. Currently, lots of people doesn't have trust in the AI techniques and technologies, and ease of use of AI is a big barrier for us in order to adapt or adapt AI in our daily activities that we have.
Yeah, and I think one for me is just about look at who's developing this. Try as you can to diversify the influence around your models. Who's, you know, not just your team, your customers, society, you know, be collaborative around how you do this. It's difficult because we are interested in protecting our IP and, you know, commercialization, but ultimately there's just one boat, and if there's a hole in the boat somewhere else, we're all sinking. So just being responsible and ethical and inclusive about how you develop these systems would be for me. Okay. We done? Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
Fantastic, excellent chairing, and great to keep us to time.